Welcome, Alex. This is Alex Tuckman from Spikenard Farm, and look at that beautiful picture behind you. Beautiful. Looks like you have a crown. I was just reading recently, there's been some amazing research on the flower as a listening ear, that apparently the flowers actually are sensitive to the vibrations of the bees and they listen in that way and will actually increase the sugar content in their nectar as a result of just that vibration. And it's
Yeah.
perfect, this listening ear behind you. Wonderful. So Alex is a beekeeper, an educator, a farmer, an author, and like all of us, a student of nature. And he's the director of the Spikenard Farm Honeybee Sanctuary. And so he's often found on the farm with the bees and in the classroom. He's also a co-director of the agricultural section of North America, which is part of the Anthroposophical Society, and is an active contributor to the biodynamic agriculture and natural beekeeping movements. And he regularly teaches at conferences in the US, around the world, and online. And in 2021, he put out a book, A Lively Hive, which is a fascinating read and worth it if you're curious about the life of bees. So, welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, it's great to be here with you all, and thanks for the introduction. And yeah, should I just jump right in, or
Yeah, well, I'd like to
to
just
ask?
kind of get
Yeah.
a start. So, I'm curious, you obviously have been deep in this connection with the land. When did that start for you?
Um, the first time I the first time I really got into gardening was in high school. Um, and I was born right outside of Chicago, and I had a friend who had a like an urban garden, and he also had bees. And he invited me over one day to help him turn his compost pile. And I got there a little bit early, and he had a big spacesuit on and a beehive open. Um, and I was in like shorts and t-shirt, and but I was immediately enthralled. And I stood right in front of the beehive, like right in front of the entrance, which is just about the worst place to stand. And the bees were flying in and out. And they didn't seem to mind me at all. And my focus was just so intent on, like, this is the first time I ever saw inside this mysterious, wondrous creature. And so I was fully, engrossed in the experience and looking at what I was seeing. And from that moment on, I was like completely hooked. Um yeah, connection with nature had always been a big part of my life, and I didn't exactly know what I was going to do with that, but getting into the bees and then into gardening and agriculture in Illinois, basically from that moment on, I haven't looked back. It's been kind of my trajectory since, yeah. So that was
That's
about
really,
17 years ago, 18 years ago. Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing how it can grab you so strongly. So that's bees and garden. How did biodynamics enter into this for you?
Um, the first the first beekeeping book I ever got was by Gunter Hauk, the founder of Spikenard Honeybee Sanctuary. Towards Saving the Honeybee was his book. And yeah, a couple of my early mentors in college at Loyola University Chicago um, were kind of attuned to at least that biodynamics was something. And the questions that I was bringing, I was really looking for wholeness and seeing a great separation between, these like silos within the university of theology and Christianity and spirituality and science. And there's a big gulf in between the two. And I kept asking questions, trying to connect and make those into one. And I asked this question to my sustainable agriculture professor, and he gave me the agriculture course by Rudolf Steiner. He said, "You should check this out. I mean, this person is really making a bridge between science and the spirit. I think you'll find this interesting." And
Nice.
it just, I was about a half hour away there from Angelic Organics Learning Center, and then in southern Wisconsin, the Zinneker farm, which is one of the oldest biodynamic farms in the United States, continually operating biodynamic farms in the United States. And they had study groups on, yeah, both biodynamic agriculture and anthroposophy. So I was really close and kind of just got plugged in.
Awesome.
Everything was there, like the table was set somehow for me. So, and I really connected, I really made an interconnection to it pretty quickly.
That's wonderful. Yeah, because I know you're a big advocate for all of it, just seeing the activity that you're doing around the country and the world, really. I'm so glad you connected early. Yeah, what a
Yeah,
gift.
thank you.
Well, wonderful. So you're going to be talking today about biodynamic beekeeping as a spiritual path.
Yeah.
And I know you have some slides. You want to cue those up?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I wanted to share some pictures from our farm and also my yeah, what like the way that I approach beekeeping as a spiritual path. I really kind of start with a macrocosmic picture. I'm trying to work with sort of the artistic and the imaginal realms in nature, and um, allow those to really come alive in myself so that they can become active principles when I'm out there in the field with the bees, that I'm not just like thinking about it, but I can really kind of integrate. Again, for me, it's kind of finding my way into wholeness. And so I kind of like to start. Um, I'll share a little bit about the Honeybee Sanctuary and some of the work we do there, but I'd also like to bring some kind of bigger pictures of like the animal world as a whole, and this sort of connection between self and nature as we'll start to narrow further and further towards the honeybees and um, their teachings, and then how, yeah, just how those have been integrated and incorporated and actually become like a set of beekeeping principles that we're, working with, exploring, trying out in the world. And yeah, by the end, I think we'll start to get a little bit more into the practicalities and research and some of the things that are really kind of at the cutting edge of our inquiry and our questions for how can we really serve the bees? How can we really carry this work forward in a healthy way? So I'll bring up my pictures here. Can everybody see that okay? Good. Nice. Well, I'm sitting right here in my office, which is in this building called the Bee Barn. And on the right-hand side there is where my office is. And so, when you come out the door, it's like during the growing season here, it's a pretty magnificent flowering landscape that we've created. And this was a cow pasture, with no infrastructure or anything on it, about I guess that was 15 years ago, when the founders, Gunter Haug, who I mentioned already, and his wife Vivian, um, moved from Illinois, where Spikenard Farm Honeybee Sanctuary originally started, moved up here into the mountains. We're in the Blue Ridge Mountains in a little town, or near a little town called Floyd, Virginia. And so it's like pastures and woods, and we have a beautiful little river that kind of circles around us called the Little River. It's a really like the clean air, like the water, the stars. It's a really beautiful place to create what we call a sanctuary, which is really a safe place where the bees and so many different parts of our farm ecosystem are just absolutely thriving. And of course, we're looking to see what are the parts that are not doing so well. What, those, like looking towards those places where there's indications that we ought to make some changes, or we ought to maybe develop our practices a little bit further to integrate wholeness that can lead towards health and well-being. And we started with a honeybee sanctuary with the honeybees really at the heart and center, and they remain our central teachers here. They're the way that the honeybees are in the world. It's hard to not just naturally find your way towards awe and reverence and wonder when you're in the presence of, the phenomenon of the honeybee is something that seems to really touch human beings' hearts in a beautiful way. So for us, it becomes this lovely kind of doorway into really exploring healthy relationships. And for us, the word sanctuary, the bees are, they have their hive and they build their comb, and they have this, we call it a hive body, which is the beehive that we put the bees into. That's kind of like their body, but they're not isolated at all in that hive body. They are so interconnected to the landscape around, to the point where if the landscape is not healthy, the bees cannot be healthy. And if the bees are not healthy, then the landscape can't be healthy. And you have this kind of wholeness created by the two. And that's true, of course, of any animal husbandry. Any sort of context that you're trying to place an animal into needs to be a context that supports their well-being. So the picture of the sanctuary as context for the bees is something that we're really working towards engendering their the health and well-being that they need, which is so much derived from flowers, from flowering plants, for the sources of nectar and pollen. And this is nestled within a biodynamic farm. So we also have vegetables and an orchard, and we're growing grains, and we have goats here, we have cows. Actually, we're moving cows from our neighbor, the Josephine Porter Institute, onto Spikenard's land for the first time this afternoon. So it's a beautifully growing kind of farm organism here. And one thing that has really been growing in me from Rudolf Steiner's pictures that he gave at the beginning of the agriculture course, and actually throughout the agriculture course, like this picture of the farm as an individuality, for me has been growing right along with my own development as a human individual. And I've recognized and really come to see sort of the importance of that relationship, that the development of the human being and the development of the agricultural organism or agricultural individuality, they're completely intertwined and mutually dependent on each other. I can only take things as far as I can, as far as my capabilities allow me to. I can only see as much as my eye has been trained to see. And so allowing health and well-being to happen is something that's also happening inwardly too. So we're going to go on this exploration together, and I'll give you some pictures of what I mean. But the human relationship to the bees and to the earth is something that's central to all that we do at the sanctuary. So we're a nonprofit organization, which means that education, sharing, creating festivals, creating context where human beings can step in and feel like, oh, this is a sanctuary for me too. This is something that becomes really important to us. So we're working with people of all ages. Lovely to have school groups coming here on a regular basis. And also, we're teaching professional, we go to professional beekeeping clubs. We're, from children to amateurs to anybody just interested to all, we're basically open for anybody that's interested in developing their relationship further with nature and with the bees. And our kind of central teachings here are really geared towards these kind of basic questions that come, yeah, maybe from Parsifal, or some of us are familiar with these questions. For the bees, it's really like, who are you? And what do you need? And how can I serve you? And we're working out of that, working out of those questions is a path. It's almost, it's interesting to imagine, you know, writing a beekeeping manual and saying, okay, those are my three basic questions. Who are you? What do you need? How can I help? You know, it's like there's not exactly a recipe there, because it's also a big question about, who am I? What is my capacity? What can I actually do? And so the question towards the bees times turns a little bit into like, when do I step in to maybe remove a roadblock or help support you through a challenging moment or life process? When can my hands and my effort actually serve? And when do I need to just step out of the way and let bees do out of their wisdom what they know how to do best? So bees are like constant, like bumpers, you know, kind of back and forth, weaving between how can I serve this being? And so much of that turns into developing observation, developing attentiveness, increasing our awareness, increasing our capacity to behold the other, to take them in, to really live with them in their life processes. And it's, you know, for me, it's like so interesting. I'm from Gunter Haug. You know, he learned from a man named Klaus Matzke, who was a biodynamic beekeeper at the Stuttgart Waldorf School in Germany. And Klaus learned from his father-in-law, a man named Harald Kabisch, who was at the agriculture course with Rudolf Steiner. So, you know, we have this interesting little lineage here that I can kind of like follow these human paths for the last 100 years. And all of a sudden we kind of end up at this place where we're meeting actual practices where we can bring some of these spiritual ideals and some of this knowledge from all of these humans who have really looked at the bee with the eye that included the spirit in matter. So for me, I'm like, let's let's bring this into this community. Let's share this as much as we can for anybody that's interested in carrying a path like this forward, and also sharing that there are some really practical things that we can do that are aligned with the wisdom of the bee. We don't only have to step away and say, I don't know any, like the bees know way more than I do, you know, because the world as we meet it today has some serious challenges for honeybees. They go out of their hive body and into the landscape, and it's not all sanctuary. It's not all roses and clean water and, you know, all the good things that the bees need. Many of those challenges that the bees face, you know, many of us have heard of like the crisis colony collapse disorder, that, you know, from April 2023 until April 2024, the United States lost 55% of our honeybee hives. You know, these bring kind of big questions towards the wider community. How do we do this? How can we create a situation where a creature as important for the upholding of the household of nature as the honeybees is in real trouble? And so this is what I mean by practical. Like our success, the survival of our hives at the honeybee sanctuary here has been an 88% success rate in the last 15 years at the sanctuary. So it's interesting to start to measure or start to think about, like, what is health really? And how do health and longevity relate to each other? and how do we measure this, that the bees are thriving? But so we're that's part of the cutting edge of where we are and wondering. But for a lot of people who want to kind of meet the spirit of the bee and make it practical, a lot of people who are really interested in this path of biodynamic beekeeping, um, it's sort of like, how can we really make this path our own? And that's one thing that I love to share, because it's, we're doing something here in Floyd, Virginia, but it's going to be a very different context if you're trying to keep bees in California, or in Costa Rica, or in Brazil, or in Switzerland, or wherever you are. So that this is really important, I think, to really get the images, to start working with these kind of spiritual pictures that connect us to the greater bee. We could call this the great bee, or the spiritual bee, or the group soul of the bee, the one that is carrying this stream of wisdom. And kind of it manifests in different faces. In one apiary, each hive is a little different. Each hive has a different personality, a different way of interacting with the beekeeper. These are all sort of like faces of the wise one, the great bee. And then the context, of course, looks different when you move this to a different place on Earth, a different bioregion with different rhythms, which I'm really excited for Patricia's bringing us into some of those aspects, because it is so different if you have a 4-season climate, or you're tropical, or you're dry, or your land is getting rain from the beginning of the year all the way through. Like Virginia is sort of like a land of milk and honey. Like, our situation with rain has not been lacking, at least since I've been here. It's abundant and green, and there's something in, like, we can have things starting to bloom already in February and go basically all the way until the end of November. So our season where we can actually grow flowers for the bees and have things available for them is quite expansive. And so, but it's not the case if you live in the desert, or you're living up in Canada, or so on. So, like, living into these seasonal rhythms, and sort of following the path of the bee, and see how do they expand and contract. What are their pathways in this given environment through the cycles of the year, and how can we really learn that and support that, and also make that our own. And so taking kind of like higher principles like that, and then seeing how can we apply them in all of the different contexts. So one of my favorite verses, little mantrams that I love to work with from Rudolf Steiner, there's a number of different places where he brought this, but there's a beautiful lecture series from 1923, the same year, and basically the same time period that he gave the lectures on bees, called Man as Symphony of the Creative Word. And this, to me, sort of gets at the heart of where we're or how we're working with the bees here as a spiritual path. So this is: to find and know yourself, look all around you in the world. To find and know the world, look into all the depths within yourself. So this kind of picture, gives us a chance to weave between those two bumpers of knowing yourself and knowing the world, and seeing this sort of movement, the staff of Mercury, if you will, or kind of seeing that there's this great center line that's leading us into a beautiful bridge between heaven and earth, and we're kind of weaving from side to side as we breathe in, and breathe out as we look out into the world and look into the depths within ourselves. Each time we rise up in the morning and go to sleep at night, this kind of beautiful rhythm of consciousness, of awareness, of being here on earth and being in the spiritual world, the kind of daily weave. And there's sort of like a primal oneness in this verse too. There's this picture of the microcosm and the macrocosm. There's kind of like, it takes us to the beginning, and in that primal oneness, we should think, oh, well, we're one with everything, right? And yet we find ourselves in a context, in a contemporary situation where we kind of have to work for that one. It's not just a given. It's not just evident. There's a little bit of effort there to really find oneness in the way that the bees live it, in the way that you find in nature. So through the course of human evolution, we've transformed and metamorphosed, and the situation of our soul life has increasingly found ourselves separated from the animals. And the separation, I think, also has its cosmic purpose. And yeah, we'll continue to talk about the development of love, but here's a little seed planting for that one here. So how do we consciously build a bridge in freedom rather than just being one with all? How do we activate that force that builds this connection? How do we really engage with these beings of nature in a process of knowing, in a process of understanding, in a process of these questions like, who are you? What do you need? How can I be of service? It's like trying to be a friend. It's like a true friendship is what we're going for here, to try to know the other. And it takes a lot of time. Each being requires, if we're really trying to be friends, it's not just like, hey, how are you? It's really like, how are you? And like, who are you? That sort of work, yeah, this is a path, a real path of inquiry. And the process of knowing yourself is so intertwined. So we have that lovely, like, lemniscate, or to know yourself, know the world, to know the world, know yourself. To look into the eyes of a creature like a goat. Yeah, try that for a second. The eyes are so unique. Those little horizontal, yeah. If you ever look at the eyes of a cat, it's completely opposite. They're running vertical, the slits. Okay, so continuing in this kind of like learning the qualities, the gestures, the archetypes, and we can ask, like, in which element does the butterfly thrive? What are they related to? What does their life embody? And yeah, again, a little synthesis from the Symphony of the Creative Word lectures for me is just a lovely process for really making this alive and not just kind of dead or abstract or intellectual. But I love this encouragement to develop the artistic approach into an instrument of perception. Cosmic activity is indeed the greatest of artists. Yeah. So in man, a symphony of the creative word, we have this deepening of our understanding and these artistic pictures that when we take in these artistic pictures and then go out into the world, our perception is furnished with a certain capacity to perceive something, to awaken, to increase our awareness, to be able to potentially see something that if we weren't furnished with this awareness, with these ideas, we hadn't really taken in these images and made them our own, maybe we wouldn't be able to perceive quite yet. We wouldn't be ripe enough to take in the spiritual element, maybe, that's also wedded and married to that physical being there. And the butterfly and the plant are kind of lovely symbols here of kind of almost like right in the middle, like the plant reaches up, and where the plant ends, the insect begins, or the butterfly begins. There's a lovely sort of wholeness in this picture, but there's such a kind of a unique in nature, like a beautiful way to see two kingdoms, the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom, sort of in a oneness, kind of forming a bridge between those two worlds, and seeing like the upper part and the lower part. So the butterfly, we have these four stages: the egg, the caterpillar, the chrysalis, the butterfly. And when we look at the plant aspects of that, we have the seed, the leaf, the flower, the fruit. This kind of image of a similar kind of archetype, one that's planted in the earth, the other that's freed to the cosmos, the other that's freed to that's in its element when it's living in warmth and in air and in light, in the upper sphere, which we would connect to the outer planets, starting with the sun in the middle, and then to Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. And with the plant, we have sort of these same gestures, if you will, but connected to the earth, chained, like with roots, going down into the ground, planted into the earth, the lower sphere, where earth and water are the elements where the plant is most at home. And again, we have a lovely verse here to work with, a lovely kind of meditative picture that we can bring with us as we go and visit the butterfly and the flower, as we go witness the interaction between these two. Behold the plant. It is the butterfly fettered by the earth. Behold the butterfly. It is the plant freed by the cosmos. So the Symphony of the Creative Word, it has a number of little mentions towards the bee, but it mostly takes the butterfly as this representative of the insect world. So here we're going to make a little bit of a transition to the bee lectures, which were given right around the same time in 1923, the end of 1923. And I'll just give a little nod to one of the only places that Rudolf Steiner speaks about the bees in this wonderful lecture series. He says, particularly the luminous, wonderfully radiant, shimmering aura of the bees as they flit from flower to flower is unusually difficult to explain. And why? It is because the bee is everywhere accompanied by a fire spirit, which feels so closely related to it that for spiritual vision, the bee is surrounded by an aura, which is actually a fire spirit. So this is a little bit of nourishment for your perception, hopefully, that you might find yourself in a moment in a garden where the bees or the butterflies are going from flower to flower and experience something. The the bees are again and again giving us these pathways, these beautiful connections to give to furnish our perception with an actual physical manifestation of spiritual principles. So this is happening again and again. That in the bee lectures, Rudolf Steiner speaks about swarming bees, and he gives kind of this picture of the bees when they're swarming as the picture of a soul leaving a body, as the soul leaves the body at the point of death and goes through its process towards reincarnation. And the bees themselves, when they're leaving their body, this whole group, this whole swarm of bees going up into the air, leaving their body, in a way, it is like a soul on a tree. It is, we have this group of bees, we have a queen, but there's really no future until that gathering, till that soul, till that group of bees actually incarnates and enters into a new hive body, where then it can grow wax comb, which is the very foundation, like the bones, the womb, it's like the groundedness on earth begins with the development of this wax comb. At this point, where we are here, this is kind of the, like, almost a picture of a soul without a body. The reincarnation imagery is lovely at the end of the bee lectures. He says, if you look at a swarm of bees, it is to be sure visible, but it really looks like the soul of a human being, a soul that is forced to leave its body. Bees can't find their way into the spiritual world. We have to take them to an empty beehive to bring about rebirth or reincarnation of these bees. This is very directly a picture of reincarnating human beings. I'm so curious about this as a beekeeper, allowing the bees, supporting the bees through this process of swarming. It's a beautiful opportunity to support the bees through a process that is actually so important for their own healing and for their own rejuvenation. The queen bee, for example, who has been laying eggs inside the body of the hive, doing her work in there for generally a whole year, all of a sudden flies out into the sun after being, like in the inner heart and core of this midnight sun, you could say, inside the hive body. But now all of a sudden she enters into the external world. She leaves this body behind, flies out into the sun, and it actually changes her body chemistry. It rejuvenates the sperm that she's carrying in her spermatheca. It gives this complete reset moment. The strength and vitality of a swarm put into a new hive body is more than anything human beings can try to emulate or take a shortcut. Like, for example, a lot of beekeepers use splits called nucleus colonies, or they buy a package of bees that comes in the mail. These are all, attempts to replicate something that is so far beyond what we can actually replicate. This is one course where we need to really just be a midwife or a support to help guide this being into its new body. The most we can do, or the best we can do, I think, as beekeepers, is actually to create a beautiful hive body that the bees can then move into. So, yeah. I love this quote. Insects teach us nothing short of what might be considered the highest understanding we can derive from nature. Yeah. And this there's some really wonderful imagery here to see how do we meet the group soul? How do we meet the great bee? And how is it possible that this creature is capable of doing of being both individual as an individual honeybee and like a superorganism where they are a social community whose wholeness is greater than the sum of its parts, where actually their consciousness reaches a higher level because they are all contributing, each individual bee is contributing and serving this higher goal. And Rudolf Steiner's picture of this is that the bees are actually embodying something on Earth that we will only achieve in the far distant future. That these creatures are so vulnerable actually because they've reached this high stage at an early point in evolution, and that they give us this image of where we could go, where human beings could go if we could develop life based in love. So these relationships to the higher spiritual beings are something that the bees continually lead us on this path towards. And one of our kind of central researches at the sanctuary here is to really look at the relationship of the bees and the sun. So the honeybee is often referred to, and this is, ages and ages. Steiner was certainly not the first one to highlight this relationship of the warmth and the light and the bees' capacity to internalize warmth and light in the very structure of their being, but also the gifts, the service, the sort of offering that the sun imbues here to our earth is something that the bees in their radiance and their warmth and their light also offer to the earth. And how the sun and the rhythms of the sun and the sun as it moves through the zodiac and sunspots and eclipses and all of these things are related to the bees is something that's kind of at the core of our current studies. But there's some really good, basic understandings that we have. The sun, of course, the bees are not able to fly during the nighttime. It's really during the day. They use the sun as their orientation device. They have these three simple eyes on the top of their head called ocelli, and they're basically guide their way through the world in relationship to the sun. And the form that they use in order to connect to the sun is they fly in these big figure-8 lemniscates, or analemas, if you will. These wonderful figure-8 forms kind of lock them into the sun. So they're guided through the world by sun. And if you call those, you could call those fire spirits too, or you could see the relationship, this kind of web of relationship between the sun and the bees and the fire spirits, and that their basic physiology is also connected to this, is something that's written in the bee lectures, that the sun needs about as much time to rotate on its axis as a drone needs to develop. So that's 24 days. If you look at the sun and you see the rotation on its axis by the movement of sunspots, you can get the picture that it takes 24 days for the sun to make one full rotation at the equator. So he gives kind of this way to understand the different castes, the drone, the worker, and the queen, in relationship to this rhythm, this sun, the 24-day sun rhythm, saying that the drone has gone through this whole rotation and has sort of seen every aspect that the sun has to offer to it, and has just dipped into what he calls the earth development. So the sun development takes 24 days, and then we sort of dip into what he calls earth development, saying that the drone kind of embodies a little bit more of an earthly nature, and this is where the male fertilization powers come from, where the seed forces come from, where when we look at the worker, it takes 21 days to develop, and when we look at the queen, it's 16 days. It's incredible how quickly the queen goes from egg to full adult. And yet these queens, in a healthy sanctuary situation, our queens are living 7 or 8 years. So this like incredibly short development, but this lifestyle this lifespan that the queens are able to embody, and this incredible healing process that they go through in the swarming, where they come into relationship again with the sun. And yeah, so we have our queen bee right in the center here. And I'm gonna skip ahead just a little bit because I spent a little more time than I wanted to on a few things. So just bear with me for a second. So the general picture that we receive, in school or whatever, about the relationship between bees and plant and the whole world of plants, is expanded in a great way through these bee lectures. When we see any stinging insects in relationship to the plant world, we're pointed in our research and in our work towards this substance called formic acid, which all of the stinging insects have in their bodies. So the ants, the wasps, the hornets, the yellow jackets, these are the only creatures on Earth that create formic acid in excess and make it available to the terrestrial ecosystem. And their role in nature is so important, specifically because of this formic acid. When a bee lands on a flower, there is this beautiful exchange going on. We can think of the breath, the breathing in of carbon dioxide, or the breathing out of carbon dioxide, the plant breathing in that carbon dioxide, and of course the oxygen coming out from the plant and breathed in by the bee. But there's also in the out breath of the bee, it's laden with all of these wonderful acids. And formic acid just happens to be the building block of all of this group of acids called the carboxylic acids. And these acids are the building blocks of all amino acids, and therefore the basis of all protein formation. And the formic acid, it's called the mother acid because it's the simplest of all of these. And when the bee lands on the flower and is breathing out, and the plant is breathing in from the bee, it actually receives the chemical stimulation that it needs to create more nectar, and then the physical material that it needs to do it. So it has a stimulation, and then it's given this formic acid, which helps it to actually create the nectar that the bee is attracted to and connected to. So, and the plant itself is giving off, as it draws the bee in, it's through this sense of taste and smell that the bee has through its antenna. So it's the antenna of the bee that actually taste the nectar. And as flowers are in bloom, that nectar is constantly evaporating basically the evaporation of the nectar is the aroma that's going off into the atmosphere around the flowers, and that is drawing the bee towards that spot. And as the bee is drawn in, and there's this wonderful exchange going on, then the plant is given the material it needs through the formic acid, through being visited by stinging insects. It's given the material it needs to create more flowers, this wonderful stimulation. And that whole process, if you didn't have a bee coming to visit a flower, a lot of flowers, it's just about 2 hours on a sunny day before all that nectar has evaporated and there's nothing left. But if it's visited by a bee and that nectar is taken in, then all of a sudden there's this wonderful positive feedback process, and you have the development of more nectar and then more bees. And so the health of the bees and the health of the flower are, so this is why Rudolf Steiner talks about the stinging insects as doctor, because it helps to maintain the life of these plants and their flowering, at their flowering state especially. And the bee landing on the flower, this this is one of, like, for me, this is a beautiful meditative process for us to kind of take into our soul, that the bee lands on the flower and it takes in this nectar, which otherwise is just transient and fleeting. I said it could be gone in like 2 hours. It takes this substance into its body, and at the back of its body in the abdomen, it has an organ there called a honey stomach, or a crop, which is actually, like, they call in science, we call it a social stomach. So this is a stomach that's it's not an individual bee's stomach. It's actually taking in something that is for the whole. So one bee is not going to the flowers and eating. One bee is actually going and gathering that nectar, and that nectar is going into this honey stomach, and in the honey stomach, it meets these digestive enzymes and ferments and bacteria that is kind of this like perfect sourdough starter. So when the bee is going from flower to flower, that nectar is getting enriched by all of these wonderful living forces and juices that it's mixing and mingling with in its gut. And it brings that to the entrance of the hive, and another bee comes and meets it there, and it regurgitates that nectar into the proboscis and then into the honey stomach of that other bee that receives it, who brings it up to the cell and deposits it there at the top in an open cell. And then another bee comes and works on it and brings it into her stomach and out again, and into her stomach and out again. And it begins to like bubble and ferment and ripen and transform. And when those cells get full and the bees sense that the nectar has ripened into honey, they stand over it on top of that with their wings, and they fan over the honey, and that draws out the water again, which slows and then eventually stops the process of fermentation. And so once they've stopped the process of fermentation, they sweat out this pure, clear wax that they use to cover the tops of the cells, and that seals in the honey in these beautiful hexagonal capsules in the honeycomb. And it becomes this basically eternal food. Honey is the only food on earth that never spoils. If you keep it in these conditions, it will last for thousands and thousands of years. So the bees have been able to take something so fleeting, so transient, and transform it into something basically eternal. This is a way that outer life becomes inner life, and how, like, for me, this picture, like, we have a number of wonderful exercises for me, like the spiritual exercise that's called the ruksha, or it's sort of like before you go to bed, you take a review of your day, starting from the moment you sat down into bed, and then you walk backwards through your day towards the morning when you woke up. And it's like this inner process of digesting the day, of transforming it, of not just being a passive receiver of what happened, but really taking hold of and bringing it in and digesting it and working on it and putting it into your honey stomach and enriching it, transforming it, making something that could have just passed you by without you taking notice. Taking a moment like that and making it your own, making honey from that moment. I think a lot of us have had that experience in our life of maybe just reading one sentence in a book, or sitting in on a lecture, and maybe you didn't hear anything else in that lecture, but this one sentence just bing is like exactly what you needed to hear, and it sent you on a direction that you needed to go. You were just waiting, and you were in the right moment, and you were aware, and all of a sudden, and think of how much you took that in to yourself, just that one fleeting moment, how meaningful that was. So that's what I would call making honey out of life, something that the bees are doing all the time. There's a lovely quote I love to share from Rilke. He says, "It is our task to imprint this temporary, perishable earth into ourselves so deeply, so painfully and passionately, that its essence can arise again invisibly inside us. We are the bees of the invisible. We wildly collect the honey of the visible to store it in the great golden hive of the invisible." And then I'll just kind of end this little path of honey with something. For me, it's so amazing that the bees don't just gather honey to like hoard it, to just have it. It's not like, oh, I have enough, I'll just let those flowers evaporate and do their thing and not be serviced. They're so engaged in service, and it's also like honey is not just for getting fat, it's not just for hanging out and not having to work anymore. Honey is really put in service to the greater whole, and it's not an endpoint. It is the start of life. It is, for the bees, honey is the basic substance that they actually need for the development of the whole hive and the life of the whole hive. So there's two main things that they use honey for in the support of their life. And the first one is wax. So the bees eat honey, and through their body, they're able to actually metabolize and transform honey into wax. They have a bodily system called a fat body, which they share with all insects, all insects with exoskeletons that have what's called a fat body, that the bees have this special capacity through these wax glands in the bottom of their abdomen to actually enlarge their fat body through the eating of honey, and then exude wax, these tiny little platelets. So you see that little platelet in the center of that picture. One honeybee can sweat out 8 of those platelets in one day. And they're fed, they're feeding each other honey, and then they hang in these little groups or balls. It's called festooning, where they're hanging in chains. They're sort of measuring the space or living into that space in gravity. And out of this hanging and festooning, this wax, they sweat it out of their bodies, and they pass it from their abdomen to their middle legs, to their front legs, to their mandibles, and then in the complete darkness, they use their mandibles to form this wax comb. So when a swarm of bees first moves into an empty body, into an empty hive body, the first thing that they do is they create warmth, also out of honey, which I'll talk about in just a second. And then out of that warmth, the wax emerges as the bees are transforming the honey they've carried with them in their honey stomach. They've put that into service, transforming it into fat, you could say, or into wax. And then they've created these beautiful hexagonal cells kind of in the darkness of their body, which is basically the basis for all of their life. It makes it possible then that they can transform nectar into honey and transform pollen into bee bread. And the queen can lay eggs and they can do their waggle dances and they have bones and structure. And so the wax itself is like this living, growing tissue. And it takes about 8 pounds of honey for the bees to make 1 pound of wax. So it's this great transformation of substance, and the need for honey, the very first thing that they need in order to make wax in their body is a good flow of nectar, a good stash of honey that they can metabolize and transform into wax. And then the second thing is warmth. So a lot of us have heard of this substance called propolis. The bees use these resins that they gather from the sticky buds of trees, and they smear it into all like the cracks and crevices. And if a carpenter bee comes and drills a hole in their hive, they'll use propolis. So propolis is like, it's antiviral, antimicrobial, antibacterial. It's got all of these wonderful substances from the resins of trees that they then mix with pollen and wax, and they create this like glue, this sort of like paste, and they seal up drafts and cracks and crevices, but they basically create like a skin that surrounds the whole inner cavity of the hive. It's a really beautiful and important part of their immune system, and yeah, their capacity to deal with disease and so on. And the hive scent and the warmth is all like held in by this propolis. If the entrance is too big, they'll use propolis to make it much smaller. This is from like a top bar hive that we left this big plug open, and the bees said, "Oh, better make this smaller for winter." So they made it so just like one bee can fit in and out. Yeah. So the bees, they're, I guess technically a cold-blooded insect, but the warmth is sort of where the beingness of each hive lives and is born. Inside the beehive, the very first thing, like I just mentioned, is that they create warmth. And then out of that warmth, the wax is sweat out and kind of molded and formed. And then as soon as the queen lays eggs into that cell, a very particular atmosphere is required for the incubation of those eggs. So it's 98 degrees Fahrenheit that those eggs need to develop properly. And the bees they are an incredible insect in so many ways, but this unique skill, this capacity to transform honey into warmth, has really allowed this superorganism to thrive through all seasons of the year, to be perennial, so to speak. So in days where it's less than 98 degrees, the bees are warming the inside of their hive. And they can do this by eating honey, and they have this physiological capacity to unhinge their wings from their wing muscles. And then they vibrate those wing muscles to generate warmth. And so the honey, the second most important reason, or maybe, don't need to rank them, but the other most important reason for honey, besides the creation of wax, is the creation of warmth, because those eggs and the development of the larva and the pupa all need 98 degrees. And for where we are here in Virginia, like the beginning of this last week, it was in the negative temperatures. And so the bees, if they're carrying a brood nest through the winter months, it's an incredible amount of honey that is needed for them to maintain that 98-degree temperature. So, working with hives that are round and well insulated, like this sun hive here, or the Warre hive, or wrapping the hives for the winter months so that there's a nice buffer from the outside cold temperature, and so that the bees can really create this inner atmosphere of warmth that, for me, it's the image, the kind of meditative picture that I carry for the bees through the winter months is that of a candle. And it's incredible to me that we start with the sun, we start with warmth and light bathing the earth from the sun. We have these wonderful plants with their capacity to transform light into sugar, photosynthesizing, transforming light into sugars, and then that the most highly refined of those sugars go up to the nectary, and they're so volatile there, and they can, evaporate quickly, and the bees have the capacity to take in that light, that warmth, and transform it and bring it inward and make it their own, and then they create wax and warmth again. Like we have this inner sun development. The bee is completely related to the outer sun, especially during the season of the year where it's warm and light, and the plants are thriving. And yeah, the bees can't really fly outside if it's less than 55 degrees Fahrenheit. They need that atmosphere of warmth to go out of their inner warm atmosphere that they create themselves within their hive body. So yeah, I've been living with these images and working with them for a number of years, and I take them with me in my daily round as I go visit the hives, and kind of carrying these overarching principles, like this need for warmth helps so much to give this sense of what the bees need, like what kind of hive do we put them into. Once we understand warmth and how essential that is for the life of the hive, all of a sudden there are these practices that are engendered by that, and there's also a whole bunch of kind of technologies and things that have been developed recently that we can just say, actually, my understanding of warmth means that ventilating the hives like that, or using styrofoam or different things, are really go against the kind of elemental nature that the bees manifest here on Earth. So yeah, I'm really grateful that we have a chance to do a panel and discuss further, and because I'd love to hear yeah, some thoughts from you all, and take things forward together.
Wonderful. Wow, Alex, I have all these wonderful quotes, things that you mentioned here, the household of nature, finding my way to wholeness. Yeah, so many. What a beautiful approach. I love this picture of building that inner picture so that the idea that we're receiving from what we read or the lectures we watch or whatever becomes a living picture that then goes out and is taken in. Would you say that you would, work with that and then be holding that picture as like Wally mentioned the other day, taking one of those emerald contemplations, taking it for 40 days. Would you take a particular picture and work with it for a while?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there's like seasons for all of these pictures almost. Like I have a rhythm where like the pictures of the swarms fit into that particular time of year, and maybe
Right.
insights will come at other times too. But yeah, or the I mean the images of like working with warmth, or like the insights that come from a deeper understanding of the queen. Um, yeah, all of those things for me sort of have a kind of like a practical moment where the relationship is going to be kind of highlighted in my life because of the daily work and
Mhm.
practice, which is why I kind of gave this the title Beekeeping as a Spiritual Path, because I think I can progress a little bit like each season, and then it's almost like you wait a whole cycle for that moment to come around again to realize, oh, I'm a little different now, and I'm a little bit like,
Yeah.
taking a few more steps since last year on each one of these images and pictures and things to work with. So,
Yeah, a bit
yeah,
like Dennis was saying, where, making a note, you have the stimulation of the life body of these beings to kind of bring that
right,
up again. But that's the science, right? Is to repeat it or come back to it again year after year or season after season.
right.
Yeah, powerful. Following that rhythm really allows for those living pictures. One thing that I couldn't help, you know, noticing is you were talking about the bees put the honey in its more watery state initially into the hexagonal comb. And Matthias was talking yesterday about the mesentery of the cow, which has also those hex, and
Yeah,
then the columnar basalt. And then the activity of those has to do with the water relationship. I wonder if there's research to be done with this, wax as a element of a preparation in the water regulation of something. I know my dad has done some work with it's not chamomile, um, camellia. What is it's a waxy, yeah, the tea plant. Where you take the leaves or the flowers of that, they have this really delicate wax to help the plants have a more facile stoma. So in
mm,
hot environments. And it
mm,
seems like with such the warmth regulation that the bees have, there's a relationship to all of this, the wax and the bee and the regulation of water and heat. Like he
yeah,
was talking about with the dynamic between the temperaments, the moist and the dryness.
mm-hmm,
Wow, they're so rich here. These pictures are just so living. And
yeah,
that last bit, making honey out of life. Oh, what a beautiful picture to be able to take those fleeting moments into your soul life and to tie that to the rickshaw and to say, right, what are we doing with that? It's not just a concentration exercise, but it's to distill those experiences down into something that can then live longer, be eternal, a part of our spiritual self and the spiritual evolution.
yeah.
Oh man, thank you so much. I can't wait for the panel this afternoon.
You're welcome. Thank you too. It's been a joy.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah,
And those pictures of that place, the contrast between the abundant flower life in the summer with that hive in the winter.
right.
When you look at the seasonality of that, I have a local hive here that I discovered. That's actually a wild hive, and it's living in basalt columns. Interestingly enough, it just occurs to
Wow.
me, but it's in the rocks.
Right.
And I just visited them yesterday, and it's silent. I tried to listen, and certainly my hearing couldn't pick it up. I think they're too deep. But to hear them, for here, our cold season is, you know, November through to like the end of March. It probably doesn't get above 55.
Mm-hmm.
And for them to be doing that for so long in this wild space,
Yeah.
to maintain that warmth through the summer, or through the winter,
Yeah.
incredible. What is your season there? How long is your cold that deep?
Um, we we're like the transition from fall to winter has a lot of ups and downs.
I think you
And
say
then
November to February, you could have no flowers, but outside of that.
yeah. And then basically, yeah, our first like basically like pussy willows, basket weaving willows, witch
Right.
hazel, hazelnuts. We'll have like brief warm periods in the end at the end of winter where some things will come into bloom. We'll have a few days of warmth, the bees will all be out, the flowers will all be out, and then cold will come again. We can have snow here until May, but
Oh,
usually it's not just
right.
it's not
Solid.
like cold all the way through there, but it's possible that anything that's trying to become a fruit could get frosted or snowed on or something like
Right.
that. Um, but yeah, it's a wonderful thing to just witness that partnership that when the it's warm enough for the flowers to be waking up and doing their thing, then the bees are awake too and
Yeah.
servicing and making that connection. Um, but
In that deep winter, if you put your ear up to the wall of the hive, can you hear them like vibrating their muscles or because their wings, that was so fascinating. Their wings don't move. I never knew
right,
that.
right. Yeah, that they can unhinge the wings from the muscles is just incredible. But they're not like in there flapping each other like
Yeah, you'd think that would cool it off.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, sometimes I actually have to place my ear and like knock in order to get a real response. Um, it's if it's a warm hive and depending on where their cluster is, how large the cluster is,
Right.
um, and then like the relationship of the cluster to the entrance where I'm placing my ear, I can usually hear without giving a knock. But yeah, giving a little knock and a hello, or even just saying, "Hey, how are you?" and then putting your ear there. Um, and then also, the winter time is a wonderful time to stick your nose at the entrance and smell, like just breathe in the scent really deeply.
Yeah.
Um, and those senses, the tone of the hum when they greet you after a knock, um, and also the scent of the hive. It can also tell you a lot about their health and well-being. Like if
Right.
there's a mouse in there, or if the honey is starting to spoil, or if fermenting or something because of pest activity from a hive beetle, or if they're
Right.
queenless, they meet you with a different tone than if they have a queen. So there's different ways you can or use your senses as tools um,
Right.
to really kind of get a picture of what the inner life is, even if it's too cold to actually open, or they're inaccessible, like in a tree trunk or
Right.
in a rock formation or something. That's they're
Wow.
kind of just relating to them in a different way.
So many different possibilities for developing perception, right?
Yeah, yeah. It seems
Amazing.
endless. Yeah,
Yeah, really, really.
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Awesome.